Your world, your challenges, your faith. When faith within engages the world without, there's power. It's living life from the inside out.
The pandemic upended everything. We can't know, not yet, just how much it's challenged us and how much we've changed. But even now, we have some idea of what we've learned. I'm Martha Manikas Foster, and this is Family Life's Inside Out. My guest is businessman, author, and attorney Peter Demas, president of Demas's and PDK Restaurants, as well as Peter D's Seasonings. His recent article in Christianity Today caught my eye. The title, The Challenge of Being a Faithful Boss When a Pandemic Nearly Kills Your Industry. Welcome, Peter, to Inside Out.
Thank you. Appreciate you letting me be on here.
I'm very interested in this topic. Peter, the pandemic mitigation and the changing regulations, at least at the start, the changes were almost daily. They all required incredible agility in the food industry. And along with that, you and your staff fielded the full spectrum of customer reactions. Restaurants around the country closed. I believe one of your restaurants even closed. So, Peter, from what you can see right now, what would you say are the biggest long-term lessons that the challenges of the pandemic have taught you? I realize it's early, but what are some of those?
Yeah, there's actually quite a few. And you said the changes were daily. Is actually at some point in time the changes were almost hourly.
Yes.
It was happening so frequently, and within our business, because in the state of Tennessee, it was changed by county to county. So we had one restaurant, one county that'd be different than another county, and we're trying to figure out like how to do it. And customers would come in with expectations that they saw on CNN that happened in New York, expecting us to have that here. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to figure out what's real and not real, and I think we all are doing that now. So kind of the long term things. There's two things I really kind of got from this outside of a faith base, more from a practical perspective, which is this pandemic has shown the necessity for clear communication, the necessity from leadership, and making certain they understand every component of it. Because, we heard that the virus you could catch on your feet onto your carpet and would hold for 5 hours. And, now we know that that's not true. And I understand that the necessity of trying to protect people, and I think that was very valuable. But I think the communication that would come out, which is we know it's dangerous and we don't know where it comes from, I think would have been a much better level of communication than otherwise. And then the other thing that we saw, and we saw this across the nation, was the attacks on churches, but not just on churches, but on the Christian life, the Christian thought process, the Christian belief system. USA Today even wrote that the Christian belief system was responsible for the attacks on January 6th. Not Christians, not activists, nothing like that. They said the Christian belief system was responsible. And so we saw this shift onto it. And even though we were able to move to online sermons and we were able to do some of that, we saw how easily that a lot of churches just folded. And we also saw how easily a lot of people said, well, in the face of fear, we need to get rid of churches. And I think that has revealed a lot of things that was under the surface.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your restaurants specifically, you were fielding, and your employees were fielding people with, a lot of high emotion, and you were fielding also your concerns about your individual employees. And then there was, of course, just income. Can you afford to even pay your employees? So in face of a lot of things that are challenging, how did following Jesus affect how you faced the challenges? And are there ways you think that walking with God through this will change the way you move forward from here?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily going to change because of what I did. I learned from a failed restaurant that I had in the past, and actually the book I wrote, last book I wrote was called Afraid to Trust, and about a third of the book dealt with learning after I got saved and learning how to handle a failed restaurant or failed business throughout that process, and learning how to deal with that fear that grips you at night of what are we going to do when everything goes away. And ultimately, it boiled down for me. It boiled down to a series of verses that I ran across. One was in Matthew 6, which is where Jesus says, do not worry, about tomorrow, for today has enough worries on its own. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, wow, what else does he say about worry? What else does the Bible say about worry and anxiety? Because I was a relatively new Christian at that time, mm-hmm. and it led me eventually to Philippians 4:6, which mm-hmm. is, do not be anxious for anything, with prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, submit your request to God. And I realized it's the thanksgiving piece that's critical when you're in those moments of stress and anxiety. So yes, during those times when we're thinking we might have to lose everything, mm-hmm. I mean, we were, within 1 week, my wife and I put an offer down on a new house, and a week later, I'm talking to a bankruptcy attorney saying, hey, I don't know if we're going to have to file bankruptcy, wow. but I want to be prepared and do it correct. So, mm-hmm. I mean, the emotional high to low, the rapidness of it all was almost overwhelming. And so when you would kind of get those feelings, I would sit there and I would say, okay, God, I trust you. Mm-hmm. And that's really what it ultimately falls down to, which is I trust him. And when I trust him, I'm going to be thankful. Mm-hmm. And so what I teach people and what I like to do myself is that when I start feeling to that overwhelmed feeling, I write down on one page things that I'm thankful for. And sometimes it's really hard. And so you have to be really creative. I'm thankful I live in a community that has a gas station on every corner. Mm. Inside that gas station, there's ice cream shops. So I can get ice cream any day right down the corner. I mean, it could be something as simple as that. But once you start, the flow will start coming a little bit more, and you start listing all the things you're thankful for. When you get to the bottom of the page, you can keep going, but at that point in time, you need to stop. And I get down on my knees, and you just thank God individually for each one. Mm-hmm. Lord, I thank you for putting me in a community that has gas stations on every corner. Mm-hmm. I thank you for being able to provide the food that I ate last night, or whatever it is. And it's amazing because Philippians 4:7 follows up with, you'll experience a peace that goes beyond understanding. And then it even ties in later with contentment at 4:10, and then 4:13 says, I could do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So all of those verses to me tie in together. They're not individually versed right. outside of each other. And it is absolutely incredible that when you go through that process of Thanksgiving and realize that he's in charge. So many times, I want to give him the remote control and then tell him what channel to turn it to,
Oh, yeah.
But so once we realize he's in charge and that he has this, and that was the thing that was so awesome about this pandemic, there is no other explanation for why. It's not like I messed up to create this problem that I can blame myself for. Like, this is just something that happened with such force that it had to have been under the watchful eyes of God. I mean, we know everything is, but when you're experiencing it, it just was like, okay, I know wherever I end up is where he wants me to be.
What a great way of looking at it. Yeah. So in a way, you're kind of saying to me that the pandemic, while I'm sure it taught a lot, you had that already in place because you had dealt with hardship before, and that you knew that going to God and trusting at least was an ongoing growing edge.
Absolutely. I mean, if you really think about it, the opposite of fear is not courage. Because Medal of Honor winners will tell you when they perform their act of courage and they get their award for it, they'll tell you that they were afraid. Police officers, before they go into a building, will tell you they're afraid even though they're doing a courageous act. Mm-hmm. The opposite of fear is actually trust. If I'm afraid that my wife is cheating on me, that means I don't trust her. And so if I'm afraid that I'm not going to get through this circumstance, means I'm not trusting God. And sometimes we just have to be honest with him and just let him know that and say, God, I don't trust you in this circumstance. I need your help to help me get through this. And the Holy Spirit will help you through it. But if we're not honest with him, and we don't want to tell him that because he already knows it in our heart anyway,
right.
But by us failing to verbalize it and trying to hide the same way that Adam and Eve hid in the garden, like, oh, we were afraid you were going to find us, yeah, because you're hiding from God behind some trees. Mm-hmm. And we're kind of doing that inside our own hearts. And so when we say it out loud and we're honest with him, and that's how that relationship can begin to build and grow upon each other.
Well, just a moment here, Peter, as I reset. If you're just joining us, you're listening to Inside Out, the Inside Out podcast on family life. I'm talking today with businessman and author Peter Demas. Now, Peter, you were already talking about thankfulness, but can you describe maybe something you saw in yourself or saw in others during the pandemic that you are thankful for today?
Yeah, it was It was absolutely incredible because we had to kind of go through the exercise of being thankful a lot during that time, and so what was really neat was things like my IT person that came on board. We hired him. We weren't sure we were going to need him. He worked for me as a manager before. He went to go work for a point-of-sale service. Well, when he came, he understood how our computers worked, how all that stuff works, from how we ring things up, and we were able to make the switch to carry out. So, it was just the people that was around. We had an area supervisor who had failed at a delivery business before, so he was able to help with the delivery side of things, which we've never done. And so you can kind of look and just see where God's provision in different parts that you didn't realize was going to be important was important. We were thankful that the person rejected our house, because I told you we made an offer on a house.
Right.
2 days later, we got the rejection on it, and we were kind of disappointed. And then 5 days after that, I'm like, oh, thank you.
Yes, yes.
So there's a lot of those individual things, and then we had employees who've been with us many years who just really just stood up and was able to do everything, and just the attitude of people of being thankful they have a job, and we just really all came together as a family, and that's not something that I guess that's not something that you get to experience all the time, or when you do, you don't really recognize it. In February of 2020, we thought everything was great, but in reality is we saw how quickly everything fell apart in 1 month.
Right.
So it's kind of like being on the Titanic. You think everything's fine, not seeing the iceberg looming ahead. And so we were in the exact same spot in February we were in March. We just didn't know it. And so we weren't thankful for a lot of those sales that we had. We weren't thankful for a lot of the employees we had. We were thankful, but not to the level and extent that we were once the crisis started to happen.
A real sense of seeing what you're appreciating, yes. So you've been through, we all have been through a great deal. You've been through a lot. You have the responsibility for a lot of people and their employment, also a lot of customers. You've seen a great deal. Would you have words of encouragement, Peter, for people listening who are reeling from the impact of the pandemic?
Yeah, and I think everybody is, even the people who were able to see a lot of success because of the pandemic, home builders. But I still think they're going to be having the impact of the pandemic in different levels. We're seeing it now with the reduction of labor. We don't know what the impact of the economy is going to be long term for this. So I think there's going to be impact that we're still going to be facing. So I think everybody is impacted by it. And I think that's one thing, is to know that you're not alone in it, that everybody is being impacted. And I think a lot of times, one of the things that Satan likes to do, and we've seen him do it to Elijah, and we've seen him do it to others, where he makes you feel isolated and alone, like you're the only one with this problem. And in reality is you're not. And that regardless of what your crisis looks like, your crisis might be different than my crisis. But at the same time, it's both a crisis. And so by having that, again, I go back to that verse in Matthew where he says, do not worry, because if Jesus is telling you not to worry, I realize that as I'm falling to the rocks below, and I just see those rocks looming and looming, he has a bungee cord tied around my ankles, and I may not feel it, I may not know it's there, and it doesn't sure look like, as my head's about to hit those rocks, that I'm about to spring back up, but he's going to jerk me back up, because he said he'll never leave us or forsake us. He says he'll take care of us. He says we'll be persecuted. He says we'll have problems. So it's not like that, but he does give us a peace. But we have to trust him and know that he has that bungee cord, and however we spring up may not be where we want to be, but it's where he wants us to be, and that's tremendously more important. So again, it boils down to that trust and knowing that he's going to take care of us, and just keep relying on it and say those verses out loud over and over and over again, because you can say it and you can believe it, and 15 minutes later you may not. But the more you say it, the more it'll become true and resonate in your hearts, because again, you're speaking his word over what's going on around us. Thank you so much for that, and thank you, Peter, for joining me here today on Inside Out. Well, thank you again. I appreciate you having me on. My guest has been businessman, leadership expert, and author Peter Demas. His book is titled Afraid to Trust. You'll find a link to the article that prompted this conversation by going to familylife.org and looking for this Inside Out story under the News tab.
I'm Martha Manikas Foster with Inside Out on Family Life.